What school really looked like in 1950s Britain wasn't anything like the romanticised version you've seen in films. Picture this: 45 children crammed into one classroom, sharing inkwells and scratching away with dip pens, while a teacher wielded a cane like it was part of the national curriculum. You might think your school days were tough, but imagine being whacked with a ruler for writing with your left hand. Yet here's the shocking twist. Despite the harsh discipline and sparse resources, British children in the 1950s actually outperformed today's students in basic arithmetic and could recite entire Shakespeare passages by heart. How did a system that would horrify modern parents produce such remarkable results? And what dark secrets lurked behind those pristine school gates? Starting school in 1950s, Britain was like entering a miniature boot camp dressed in woolen shorts. Children as young as 5 years old would march into vast Victorian buildings, their footsteps echoing through corridors that smelled of carbolic soap and fear. The infant school experience, covering ages 5 to 7, was designed to transform unruly tots into obedient citizens faster than you could say, "God save the Queen." The morning ritual was something to behold. Picture hundreds of tiny children standing ramrod straight in the assembly hall, belting out hymns with the enthusiasm of Welsh miners at a rugby match. Morning prayers weren't optional. They were as mandatory as breathing, and woe betide the child who fidgeted during the Lord's Prayer. Religious instruction wasn't just a subject, it permeated every aspect of school life like damp in a London basement. Classrooms themselves were monuments to austerity. Rows of heavy wooden desks, each with its own inkwell, faced a massive blackboard that dominated the front wall like a dark prophet of doom. The desks were bolted to the floor in perfect lines, and each had a groove for your pencil and a hole for the ceramic inkwell that would inevitably end up staining your fingers blue-black for days. These weren't child-friendly learning spaces, they were factories for producing neat handwriting and times tables. The teaching methods would make modern educators weep into their differentiated learning plans. Everything was learned by rote, endless repetition until the information was branded onto your brain. The alphabet, numbers, times tables, all chanted in unison like some educational cult ritual. A is for apple, B is for ball would echo through classrooms from Land's End to John O'Groats, creating a generation who could recite their times tables backwards but had never been asked their opinion on anything. But here's where it gets properly controversial. And I'm about to reveal something that would have child services banging down doors today. Teachers didn't just have permission to hit children, they had an arsenal of weapons at their disposal. The ruler across the knuckles was the light artillery. For more serious offences, out came the cane, and some schools even had the dreaded slipper, a plimsoll shoe that left marks for days. Left-handed children faced a particular form of educational torture. Being naturally left-handed was seen as a defect to be corrected, like a speech impediment or poor posture. Teachers would literally tie children's left hands behind their backs, forcing them to write with their right hands. The psychological damage this caused wasn't even considered. After all, spare the rod and spoil the child, as they love to say. The toilet situation deserves its own horror story. Asking to use the lavatory during lessons was practically a criminal offence. Children would sit in agony, sometimes with inevitable and humiliating consequences. The outdoor toilets, because yes, many schools still had outdoor facilities well into the 1950s, were freezing in winter and absolutely revolting year-round. Toilet paper. You were lucky if you got those waxy, non-absorbent squares that seemed designed to spread rather than clean. If you're finding these memories flooding back, or if you're amazed at how different things were, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, what's coming next about the dinner ladies and their mysterious meat concoctions will have you either nostalgic or nauseous. Moving up to junior school at age 7 was like graduating from basic training to active combat. The pressure intensified dramatically because looming at age 11 was the infamous 11+ examination, a test that would literally determine your entire future. No pressure for a 10-year-old, right? The curriculum expanded, but remained rigidly traditional. English meant passing sentences until you could identify a subordinate clause in your sleep. Grammar wasn't just taught, it was drilled into you with the precision of a dentist and considerably less anaesthetic. You learned about subjects, predicates, and subjunctive moods before you knew what a teenager was. Shakespeare wasn't saved for secondary school. Oh no, 10-year-olds were expected to memorize whole passages from Julius Caesar or Macbeth. Mathematics was an endless parade of long division, fractions, and problems about men digging holes or filling baths with no plug. Mental arithmetic was king. Calculators were science fiction, and even slide rules were considered too advanced for primary school. You learned your 12 times tables. Yes, 12, not 10 like today's lightweight approach, and could calculate the price of 7¾ pounds of carrots at twopence halfpenny per pound in your head. The teaching style remained authoritarian, but now with added competitive elements. Students were literally ranked from first to last in every subject, with positions read out publicly. Imagine being consistently told you were 42nd out of 45 in arithmetic, in front of everyone. The smart kids were praised to the heavens while struggling students were labelled dunces and sometimes made to wear actual dunce caps. Yes, those pointy hats weren't just cartoon stereotypes, they were real instruments of humiliation. Now let's talk about the elephant in the classroom, the 11+ examination. This single test taken at age 10 or 11 would determine whether you went to a grammar school, university track, or a secondary modern factory track. No retakes, no consideration for having an off day. One morning's performance would shape your entire life trajectory. The pressure was absolutely crushing. Children would be drilled for months beforehand, with practice papers becoming more important than actual education. Middle-class parents hired tutors, bought practice books, and generally treated it like a military campaign. Working-class kids, whose parents couldn't afford such luxuries, were essentially competing with one hand tied behind their backs. Here's the really controversial bit. The test was supposedly measuring innate intelligence, but it was actually heavily biased toward middle-class knowledge and experiences. Questions about servants, tennis, or classical music would appear, immediately disadvantaging children who'd never encountered such things. It was social engineering dressed up as meritocracy, and it condemned millions of bright children to limited futures simply because they couldn't decode middle-class cultural references at age 11. Secondary school in the 1950s was where the real segregation began. If you passed the 11+, you swanned off to grammar school in your fancy blazer and school tie, studying Latin and looking forward to university. If you failed, you trudged to the secondary modern, where boys learned metalwork and girls learned typing, because obviously that's all they'd need for their predetermined futures. Grammar schools were pressure cookers of academic achievement. Latin was compulsory because nothing says preparing for the modern world like conjugating dead languages. You'd study French with teachers who'd never been to France, learning pronunciation that would make actual French people weep. Sciences were taught with minimal equipment. One Bunsen burner between 4 students if you were lucky, and chemistry experiments that would now require hazmat suits were conducted with nothing but a lab coat and crossed fingers. The discipline ramped up even further. The cane wasn't just threatened, it was regularly applied. 6 of the best across the backside was standard punishment for anything from cheek to cheating. Some teachers had signature moves. The PE teacher who could make the cane whistle through the air, or the Latin master who made you bend over a chair in front of the whole class. The psychological warfare was intense too. Sarcasm was an art form, and teachers could destroy a child's self-esteem with a few well-chosen words that would be considered emotional abuse today. Secondary moderns, meanwhile, were essentially holding pens until you could legally leave at 15. The curriculum was practical, which meant boys did woodwork, metalwork, and technical drawing, while girls did cooking, needlework, and childcare. Because obviously, all girls were destined to be housewives and all working-class boys would be manual labourers. The waste of potential was staggering. Are these stories bringing back memories? Whether you lived through it or can't believe it was real, drop a comment below sharing your own school horror stories. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you're enjoying this journey into educational history. School dinners, where nutrition met nuclear warfare. The dinner ladies, armed with ladles and attitudes that could strip paint, served up daily disasters that would make Jamie Oliver spontaneously combust. Everything was boiled until it surrendered. Vegetables turned grey, meat became mysterious, and puddings achieved densities previously thought impossible by physicists. The menu was a rotating nightmare of liver and onions, spam fritters, and the dreaded mock everything. Mock cream, mock turkey, whatever they could mock, they would. Semolina pudding with a dollop of jam that looked like a wound. Tapioca that earned the delightful nickname frog spawn. Custard that could be sliced, and everything swimming in gravy that defied both description and digestion. But here's the thing, you ate it or you went hungry. There were no packed lunch options, no dietary requirements considered, and certainly no choices. You lined up with your compartmentalized metal tray, received your allocation of beige food, and sat at long tables under the watchful eye of a dinner lady who'd report you if you didn't clear your plate. The Clean Plate Club wasn't voluntary, it was enforced with the efficiency of a police state. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of 1950s education was the hidden curriculum, the unspoken lessons about class, gender, and knowing your place in society. Girls were systematically discouraged from sciences and mathematics. Even in grammar schools, they were steered towards suitable subjects like domestic science or secretarial skills. The message was clear: education for girls was a pleasant diversion before marriage, not serious preparation for careers. Class distinctions were reinforced at every turn. Grammar school students learned they were destined to lead. Secondary modern students learned they were destined to follow. The accent you spoke with could determine how teachers treated you. Regional accents were beaten out of children, sometimes literally, in favour of proper English. Welsh children were punished for speaking Welsh, Scottish accents were mocked, and anything that wasn't received pronunciation marked you as inferior. The system produced some remarkable individuals who succeeded despite, not because of, the obstacles placed in their path. But for every success story, there were hundreds of crushed dreams and limited horizons. Children who might have been doctors became factory workers because they had a bad day during the 11+. Girls who could have been scientists became typists because that's what girls did. Now here's where I'm going to be really controversial. Despite all the horror stories, some aspects of 1950s education were actually superior to today's system. The emphasis on memorization, while boring, meant children left school with a solid foundation of knowledge. They could spell, punctuate, and construct grammatically correct sentences. Mental arithmetic skills were phenomenal. Shopkeepers could calculate your change faster than a modern till. The reading levels were extraordinary. Children routinely tackled texts that would challenge today's university students. By age 14, working-class children were reading Dickens, Hardy, and Shakespeare. Not simplified versions, but the original texts. Poetry wasn't just studied, it was memorized and recited. Thousands of adults today can still quote poems they learned 60 years ago. Discipline, while often excessive, did create an environment where learning could happen. Teachers commanded respect, through fear, admittedly, and classroom disruption was minimal. Classes of 45 students functioned with one teacher and no teaching assistants because nobody dared misbehave. The nuclear option of the cane kept most children in line, though at what psychological cost we can only guess. So what school really looked like in 1950s Britain was a complex mixture of achievement and cruelty, excellence and exclusion. It was a system that produced some of the finest minds of the 20th century while crushing the spirits of countless others. It gave working-class children opportunities their parents never had, while simultaneously reminding them not to get above their station. The 1950s classroom was a battleground where childhoods were sacrificed on the altar of conformity and achievement. Yet it was also a place where teachers, despite their faults, were respected professionals who genuinely believed they were preparing children for life. They were wrong about many things, terribly, harmfully wrong, but they weren't trying to be friends or entertainers. They were educators in the truest, hardest sense of the word. Today's education system, for all its child-centered approaches and inclusivity, might learn something from the academic rigour of the 1950s. But thank goodness we've left behind the casual cruelty, rigid class distinctions, and narrow-minded approach to human potential. The cane has been replaced by conversation, rote learning by understanding, and conformity by creativity. Whether you lived through it or are simply fascinated by how different things were, the 1950s school experience remains a powerful reminder of how far we've come, and perhaps how some valuable things were lost along the way. Those inkwells and canes are museum pieces now, but the memories, both bitter and sweet, remain vivid for millions of Britons who survived the educational battlefield of the 1950s. If this journey through 1950s education has entertained, informed, or horrified you, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into British history that your teachers definitely didn't tell you about. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video where we explore everything that we miss about Britain in the swinging 60s. And remember, whether you're Team Cane or Team Compassion, drop your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, class dismissed.